Japan should have collapsed. At least, that is what traditional economics would suggest. A country with the highest debt burden in the developed world, a shrinking population, millions of abandoned homes, and an economy that has barely grown for more than 3 decades. On paper, Japan looks like a nation slowly running out of time, but reality tells a completely different story. Its trains still run with unmatched precision. Its companies shape global industries. Its currency remains one of the world's safest assets. And its society remains one of the most stable on Earth, because the survival of nations is not decided by simple numbers on a spreadsheet. It is decided by the hidden systems underneath them. This is the red line, and this is why Japan refuses to collapse. Imagine an economy where the standard laws of financial gravity simply no longer apply. For more than 3 decades, conventional economic theory has dictated that this nation should have succumbed to a catastrophic systemic failure. It carries a public debt burden that dwarfs any other nation in the developed world. Its demographic trajectory mimics a slow-motion collapse, and its domestic markets have spent decades locked in a state of stagnant inertia. Any textbook model will tell you that a country running this configuration is bound for terminal decline. Yet it survives. Not only does it survive, but it remains a globally dominant technological juggernaut, a critical hub of international logistics, and one of the safest, most stable societies on Earth. To understand how this paradox functions, one must look past the superficial indicators of GDP growth and look directly into the hidden plumbing of global capital, institutional design, and monetary sovereignty. To set a baseline for perspective, let us look at the scale of the debt. The national debt of Japan currently sits at an astonishing 260% of its gross domestic product. For context, that is more than double the debt-to-GDP ratio of the United States, and significantly higher than the levels that triggered the total collapse of the Greek economy during the Eurozone crisis. In absolute terms, we are talking about a mountain of obligations exceeding $9 trillion. In any typical sovereign state, accumulating a deficit of this magnitude triggers a predictable cascade of ruin. International investors panic, bond yields skyrocket, the national currency depreciates into worthlessness, and the IMF is forced to step in with harsh, structural austerity packages. But in Tokyo, the bond markets remain entirely tranquil. The yield on the benchmark 10-year government bond has spent years hovering near zero and occasionally dipping into negative territory. International capital does not flee the country. Instead, during global crises, investors routinely pour money into Japanese yen as an ultimate safe haven asset. The core mechanism behind this anomaly lies in an elementary but frequently misunderstood detail. Who actually owns the debt? When a country like Greece or Argentina runs into a debt crisis, it is because their obligations are owed to foreign entities, multilateral banks, international hedge funds, and foreign governments, and often denominated in a currency they cannot control, like the euro or the dollar. If foreign creditors lose faith, they simply pull their capital out. Japan, however, operates on an entirely different structural matrix. Over 90% of Japanese government bonds are held internally. They are owned by Japanese commercial banks, domestic insurance companies, public pension funds, and, most crucially, the Bank of Japan itself. The nation is essentially borrowing from its own citizens, using its own currency. Because the entire debt is denominated in yen, the risk of foreign-induced default is functionally zero. The Bank of Japan possesses the ultimate monetary shield, the infinite capacity to print more yen to purchase its own government's debt. In economic terms, this process is known as yield curve control, a relentless policy where the central bank pledges to buy an unlimited amount of government bonds to keep interest rates artificially locked in place. The government prints the bonds, the central bank prints the cash to buy them, and the capital loop remains entirely self-contained. But this monetary loop does not exist in a vacuum, and running an economy on an endless supply of printed money carries profound structural consequences for ordinary citizens. For over 30 years, this strategy trapped Japan in an economic state known as the Lost Decades. Following the spectacular collapse of its real estate and stock market bubble in the early 1990s, the country entered a prolonged deflationary spiral. Unlike the rest of the world, where prices steadily rise, Japan experienced the opposite anomaly. Prices for goods, services, and housing remained flat or went down year after year. To the average consumer, deflation might initially sound like an advantage. Your money buys more tomorrow than it does today. But in macroeconomic terms, sustained deflation is a systemic poison. When consumers expect prices to fall in the future, they stop spending today. They hoard cash. Businesses see their revenues contract, so they freeze hiring/research budgets and halt expansion. The entire corporate ecosystem stops investing in productivity, flatlining wage growth for generations. The typical Japanese salaryman today earns roughly the same nominal income as their counterpart did in 1995. While the government spent decades launching massive public works projects and stimulus packages to kickstart inflation, the domestic population simply refused to spend. This collective behavior highlights a fundamental reality of macroeconomics. Economics is driven by human psychology and demographics, not just numbers on a balance sheet. And it is within the domain of demographics that Japan faces its most formidable existential challenge. The country is currently the oldest society in human history. More than 1/10 of the entire population is over the age of 80, and nearly 30% are over 65. The birth rate has plunged far below the replacement rate of 2.1, sitting at an unsustainable 1.2 children per woman. In many rural prefectures, the local infrastructure is actively contracting. Schools are being converted into senior care facilities, and millions of abandoned homes, known as Ikea, are left to rot because there are simply no younger generations to inherit them. This demographic inversion creates an intense, double-sided strain on the state structure. On one side, the workforce is shrinking rapidly, meaning fewer taxpayers to fund the public treasury. On the other side, the expenditures required for Social Security, elder health care, and pensions are ballooning exponentially. In a standard economic model, a rapidly aging population combined with low productivity output per capita equals a terminal recipe for systemic collapse. A smaller workforce means less domestic production, less consumer spending, and an eventual breakdown of public services. Yet, walk through the streets of Tokyo or Osaka today, and you will see no signs of a crumbling third world state. The public transit infrastructure remains the gold standard of global logistics. Public safety is practically absolute, and living standards remain remarkably high. How does Japan decouple its demographic decline from a societal collapse? The answer lies in a deliberate, long-term pivot toward ultra-efficiency, automation, and global asset management. Instead of relying on a massive influx of physical labor to grow its domestic economy, Japan has systematically restructured itself to maximize the output of every remaining worker. The country has spent decades becoming the world leader in industrial robotics and automation. When an agriculture-driven or factory-driven economy faces a labor shortage, its productivity collapses. When Japan faces a labor shortage, it replaces the missing workforce with automated systems, self-checkout infrastructure, and advanced robotics. Furthermore, the true strength of the Japanese economy is no longer accurately captured by traditional domestic GDP metrics. To find the real wealth of the nation, one must look at its gross national product, or GNP, which tracks the income earned by Japanese citizens and corporations both at home and abroad. While domestic factories may have quieted down, Japanese corporations spent the last 30 years quietly buying up trillions of dollars in foreign assets. They built car factories in America, semiconductor supply chains across Southeast Asia, and acquired massive stakes in global logistics hubs. Today, Japan holds the record as the world's largest net creditor nation, possessing over $3.3 trillion in net foreign assets. Every single year, a massive river of dividends, interest payments, and profits flows back from across the globe into Tokyo. The domestic economy might look stagnant on paper, but the nation itself has essentially turned into a massive global asset management engine that finances its aging population through international investments. Simultaneously, the country's unique social cohesion acts as an invisible stabilizer. In Western economies, sharp economic disparities and demographic shifts frequently trigger deep political polarization, labor strikes, and civil unrest. In Japan, a cultural emphasis on societal harmony, institutional trust, and a shared sacrifice keeps the domestic environment highly predictable. There are no massive political movements demanding the dismantle of the financial system. Instead, the population calmly adapts to the state's managed contraction. But this entire delicate balance is now facing its ultimate modern stress test. The global macroeconomic environment has fundamentally shifted. Following the pandemic and the subsequent geopolitical fractures in Europe and the Middle East, global supply chains ruptured and commodity prices soared. For a nation that imports over 90% of its energy and over 60% of its food supply, this global inflationary shock wave hit incredibly close to home. For the first time in 3 decades, inflation has breached the Bank of Japan's 2% target. Prices for everyday essentials are rising fast, forcing a population used to 30 years of static costs to change their behavior. This unexpected arrival of inflation has forced the Bank of Japan into an incredibly dangerous corner. To combat rising prices, a standard central bank must raise interest rates. But remember the mountain of national debt, $9 trillion. When interest rates are at zero, servicing that debt is virtually free. But if the Bank of Japan raises interest rates even slightly, the cost of paying interest on its national debt will jump by tens of billions of dollars overnight, threatening to swallow a massive chunk of the federal budget and limiting spending on healthcare and social services. If they raise rates too fast, they risk triggering a severe corporate recession and a real estate shock. If they keep rates locked at zero while the rest of the world hikes theirs, the Japanese yen will continue to depreciate rapidly against the US dollar, making imports of food and fuel unsustainably expensive for ordinary households. It is a monumental macroeconomic tightrope walk where any miscalculation could ripple out to destabilize global financial markets. Because Japan is so deeply integrated into the global financial architecture, a sudden, disorderly unwind of its monetary policy would send shockwaves through bond markets worldwide, driving up borrowing costs from New York to London. Ultimately, Japan's economic chronicle illustrates that a nation does not collapse simply because it fails to hit arbitrary GDP targets or because its balance sheets look alarming to foreign analysts. A sovereign state with complete monetary control, an automated infrastructure, a massive reservoir of global assets, and deep social trust can defy the standard laws of economics for generations. Japan is not simply a story of decline. It is a preview of a future that many wealthy nations may eventually face. Older populations, slower growth, higher debt, and the difficult question of whether economies can continue to function when expansion is no longer guaranteed. Japan has not escaped its problems. It has learned how to manage them, and in doing so, it has become one of the world's most important economic experiments. Because sometimes the strongest nations are not the ones growing the fastest. They're the ones that understand how to survive when the rules of the game change. This is the red line, where geography, economics, and power collide.